Very recently, Jack Dorsey, the original co-founder of Twitter, tweeted, "Delete all IP law." And Elon Musk jumped on and said, "I agree," which created some recent waves in the media. Now, I can't speak to the computer tech world, but I do want to tell you about how scientific funding is wasting your tax dollars and how we should probably not delete all intellectual property and patents, but we should delete the pharmaceutical patent industry, the scientific patent industry. I'll explain. So first, we all know that timing is right. Our country is in a financial disaster with all our debt, and our country is in a health disaster with all the rising chronic disease. We all agree we need a complete transformation in healthcare and in big pharma, and it starts by fixing the way we fund scientific research in America. We need to say 100% of government-funded research cannot be patented or used for profit, and it can't be siphoned off by the universities or nonprofit administrators like it currently is. To do this, we need to repeal and replace the Bayh-Dole Act from 1980 that allowed universities and nonprofits to commercialize federal funding. So let me explain. So basically what's happening right now is universities hire scientists to write grants to beg for money from the government, which RFK is now overseeing at the HHS. But HHS is big. It has 13 divisions. And those divisions have divisions. So it's kind of a mess. But of the 13 HHS divisions, one is called the National Institute of Health, the NIH. And that's the main scientific research division. And the NIH has 24 divisions, which they call institutes. When you write a scientific grant, it goes to these institutes. And here's where it gets interesting and something you don't know. If a scientist or doctor is awarded $1 million grant, the university literally gets 25 to 50% of that grant, depending on how prestigious or politically connected the university is. They use fancy terminology like F&A, which means facilities and administration, modified total direct costs, or MTDC here, literally to confuse the public. It should be called non-research money, which is what it is. And the facilities and admin, they get tons of money from the government already. So we should just cut all this crap and fund the actual scientific studies with NIH. But people don't realize oftentimes 50% of a science grant goes straight into all the BS compliance officers and the HR and the legal team and those types of people. It has nothing to do with curing whatever disease or doing any actual science. So this is bad, but it gets worse. So when a scientist wins grant money, gets his half, and develops a brand new drug, which again was funded by your taxes, that were admittedly diluted by funding facilities and administration, but they were funded by your taxes. When they finally develop a new drug, the university gets to keep all the intellectual property, meaning the new drug is not public property. The money came from your taxes, the money came from the public, but now the drug is university property or property of Mayo Clinic or whatever medical institution. And they often give a tiny licensing percentage to the inventor, the scientists, but they don't have to. And they license or sell the drug to pharma companies that work with the FDA, and this process leads to high fees that fund the FDA called industry user fees, which allow the drug company to sell the drug to doctors and insurance companies. It's a mess, eh? In other words, your money is funding research that develops drugs to create profits for the universities, medical institutions, and ultimately drug companies, which sell those products back to you at a hugely inflated price because they own the patent. Nobody can copy them. Nobody can create the drug for cheaper prices, except China and places like that, because they just steal the discovery and sell it for pennies in their country. And good luck trying to litigate from America against China for anything. But this incentivizes university leadership to become entirely motivated to hire politically connected scientists or scientists that are good at getting grants, not necessarily good at science. They're good at getting grants, but they need to be either good at getting that government money or good at inventing new drugs that the university can sell to big pharma, because remember, the universities are getting massive F&A money. And the institutions or universities don't care about the actual science or how valid the science is or what the science is relating to. It's just a money-driven mess creating a monster new pipeline of drugs going to pharmaceutical companies, and most drugs aren't studied over the long term because there's no incentive to study that. And drugs are almost never studied when taken in combination with other drugs, which is called polypharmacy. And this is a real life scenario. It's a real life problem. The percentage of people taking 4 or more prescription drugs per day in the US was at 24% last time the data was analyzed in 2023. And this percentage is far higher in elderly people who are suffering from all kinds of polypharmacy reactions, and usually they don't know it. How could they? There's no studies. Nobody knows. So let's look at one real life case, the drug Lyrica. It's made for treating nerve pain, usually from diabetes because people are eating way too many carbs because the government's recommending a high carb, low fat diet. But anyways, Lyrica was discovered by scientists at Northwestern University from your tax-funded grant money. The university patented the drug, licensed it to Pfizer, rather than outright selling it. Pfizer started making it, and Pfizer raked in $1.7 billion for the drug by 2023. Were they selling it cheap or just trying to maximize profits? Obviously profits. They made 1.7 bills. And throughout all of this, Northwestern University still maintained 100% of the patent title, but Pfizer was able to corner the market and basically charge whatever they wanted for the drug, which ultimately should have been a non-patented, anyone can make it as cheap as possible product, since it was spawned from the government tax-funded research, meaning your money. In other words, we all get shafted by paying the taxes on the front end and then paying exorbitant prices on the patented drug that our money invented on the back end. I'm not a fan of taking pharma drugs if at all possible, but when you need those drugs, you shouldn't be paying for the research and then turning around and paying inflated prices for the drugs that we, the people, sponsored. Since I've published actual peer-reviewed studies in medical journals, I'll tell you another piece of insider information. In order to get grant funding, in order to be awarded money from the government to do scientific studies, you need to publish research studies. It's the major metric that shows you deserve more grant money. So all the universities and medical institutions like Mayo Clinic, where I used to work until they started forcing people to take the COVID vaccines, all these institutions want to see publications, and more publications when you work there. They don't care about the topic. They don't care about human health. They want that luxurious F&A money, facilities and administration money, that pays their expensive patent lawyers so they can make more money, because we all know the administrators need to get that new Cadillac Escalade every year because it's difficult. Their wife's Porsche 911 is already expensive. So here's what happens. Research gets sloppy and mostly meaningless. You farm out the research to international exchange students that are thrilled to be living in a 100 square foot house at age 40 on 30 grand a year. And this leads to studies like this one from 2012. Here, they selected 53 research papers on the topic of cancer and attempted to replicate the studies. Only 11% could be replicated. And in case you thought this problem from 2012 was fixed, in 2021, another group aimed to repeat 193 experiments from another 53 studies, a nod to the 2012 paper. And this time they were able to repeat 50 of the experiments from the 193, which is 25.9%. And none of the 193 experiments were even described in detail enough for them to repeat the experiments, so it was technically a 0% success rate. But when they reached out to the labs, 41% were extremely helpful, while 32% didn't respond at all, leading to definite failure if you're trying to replicate a study. Now, the irony here is the universities and medical institutions don't really care if you publish garbage, as long as you publish a ton, so they get more grants coming into their institutions so they can keep cashing the F&A money. But of course, they ultimately do want you to develop new drugs because those patents can create even more wealth for the institutions, all on the backs of sick people needing the drugs. Finally, 7 years ago, I made a video called Publishing Crap Studies, where I complained about the scientific journals. So I have here a big list of journals owned by Elsevier. Elsevier is a huge journal company that made over $2 billion in revenue last year, and they have over 2,500 journals.
They charge, by the way, they charge universities over $10,000 to access some of their journals. They make a lot of money. And of course, they lobby government to ensure that these journals can't be publicly accessed. Even though it's crazy because our taxes are the ones paying for this scientific research. Remember that.
So the journals are loving all this crap science and the need for constant publications because they're ultimately profiting on keeping the research behind expensive paywalls, which again, it's the research that you paid for with your tax money. And now you can't read the damn study because the journal wants you to buy the PDF to read more than just the abstract from the study. And anyone who has done any research on any scientific studies understands this frustration. When you try to read how the athletes improved performance with this supplement, and then oops, you can't access the actual study to see the actual doses and other details. And again, we are technically the ones paying for these studies, so the fact that we can't even read them is beyond annoying. I think the legal term is unjust enrichment. Unjust enrichment. Universities and medical institutions are getting unjust enrichment. The drug companies are getting unjust enrichment. And the only people getting shafted are we the people. How do we fix it? Easy. You get rid of patents in health science. The drug companies will drastically cut their R&D, but most of this isn't helping people anyway. The results are in. Chronic disease is rising. If chronic disease rates were actually dropping as a percentage of drug company R&D, they would have an argument to maintain this excellent system that they've created. But it's not working for the US. The people funding this whole mess are getting shafted. Chronic disease is rising despite all this. So I agree with Jack Dorsey and Elon Musk, at least from a scientific perspective. Ditch the patents and recenter scientific research away from drugs and money back to you and me, the people funding the science.